Hi friends, welcome back to the Avocado Toast Budget. If you are new here, my name is Lexa, and today we are going to talk about one of my favorite things and one of the things that helped me to get out of debt, sinking funds. But before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up to help with the YouTube algorithm. It really helps boost this video to the top. That way more people can find this content. So let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing that I want to cover is, what are sinking funds? Sinking funds are all of the non-monthly expenses that you want to plan for on a monthly basis. But I think that sinking funds are a lot more easily explained just through examples. So these can be things like vacations, car repair, or home maintenance. All of these things that we know that they're coming up eventually and we're gonna have to pay for them. We just sometimes don't know exactly when that's going to be or how much. The term sinking funds came from this idea that they are saving, but they're saving that you plan on constantly dipping into. These are not things like investing or saving for retirement that you don't plan on touching that money for a long time. Most of this money has a plan sometime in the near future. So why should you even care about sinking funds? And why did they help me get out of debt? For me, sinking funds were one of the biggest keys to kind of unlock my way into getting out of debt because I started saving for those bigger expenses on a monthly basis. For some reason, I was always shocked when my car inevitably needed new brakes every once in a while, an oil change, or the tires rotated. And what would happen is I would remember that last minute. I hadn't financially planned for it, so a lot of times that money went on a credit card. The idea of utilizing sinking funds is that you prepare for these expenses that you can expect to come up at some point. And by doing that, you set aside a little bit at a time every single month, so when inevitably you do have to spend that money, it's okay because it's there, it is waiting for you to have it do its job. Now, I want to differentiate between sinking funds and emergency funds because I think that this is an important distinction. Saving for an emergency fund is saving for truly unexpected life events. Things like huge medical expenses or a job loss. These are things that we don't see coming most of the time. Whereas sinking funds are things that we can plan for. Again, we might not know the specific day that our car is going to need new tires, or when exactly the AC in your house is going to inevitably give out in the middle of summer, but chances are something like that is going to happen. And we want to be financially prepared. Now, sinking funds are not inherently something that is used to build wealth. Your sinking funds are there to cover future you and future expenses. They're not an investment into wealth building or retirement. If you want to learn more about investing in emergency funds and how those two things kind of differ from sinking funds, I will put both of those videos up here, link them in the description, and you can click right up here to access those. So I strategically use sinking funds to help me get out and stay out of credit card debt. And the first thing that I did is I focused on the things that I could plan for. So this is a video of my actual budget with my actual sinking funds in it. Things like car repairs, medical expenses, vacations, all of that jazz. Even though I didn't know exactly how much some of these things were going to be, I knew that I wanted to start setting aside some of my money for them. And actually, this worked out pretty perfectly because today I went to go get my oil changed and I did not know that you also, apparently cars need other maintenance and upkeep than just an oil change, and my transmission was due for a change, so I had to put down almost $200 for that. But luckily, because I had that car maintenance sinking fund there, instead of that money needing to go on a credit card, I was able to pay for it in cash. Well, to clarify, I put it on a credit card, but I have the cash to pay that off, so I'm not going into more debt to pay for that expense. Now, there are two different ways that I tackled sinking funds. I broke them up into the expenses that I knew how much I needed and when I needed them, and the expenses that I knew were going to happen eventually, but I just wasn't quite sure when or how much I was going to need. So a good comparison would be Christmas versus car repairs. I knew that I wanted to save $500 by the 1st of December. That way I had enough money to fund Christmas. And because I knew how long I had until that expense came around and how much money I wanted, I was able to take the total amount that I wanted and divide that by the number of months that I had to save. So for example, today is February 20th. So if I started saving for Christmas in March, that would give me March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and then December would run around, but we're not going to count that month. So that would give me 9 months in order to save up that $500. So if I wanted to start saving for Christmas now, that way I could put a little bit aside every month and not have to worry about shelling out $500 the week before Christmas. By taking that total amount that I want saved, so the $500, and dividing that by the 9 months, I know that I need to save roughly $55 every month. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems a lot more doable than shelling out $500 from one paycheck right before Christmas. I did the same thing for other things like annual fees, car tags, and birthdays. These things that I knew when I was going to need that money and approximately how much I was going to need. However, you might be thinking, okay, Lexa, that is great for holidays and things that fall at the same time every year, but what about those things that they're kind of expected, but not really? Like we said earlier, you don't know exactly when your AC is going to give out or exactly when you're going to have to take an unexpected trip to the doctor. And if you're in the US, pay that dreaded copay. But you know that those things are probably going to happen eventually. So the way that I chose to tackle this was that I decided on a number that was realistic for me and my budget that I could set aside every single month to go toward that specific category to start building up my savings. One example that I have right now is that I am saving up for a new car. I don't know exactly when I'm going to buy one. I don't know exactly how much it's going to be, but I know that I have $100 every month that I can set aside toward that purchase. So I put that in that category every month. I don't touch that money. I know that it is going toward that expense. Now, you might be wondering how you are supposed to keep track of all of these different savings goals and all of these different sinking funds. There are two different ways that you can go about this. One of the ways that you can go about it is just opening up multiple savings accounts and renaming those accounts for the goal or the sinking fund that you are working toward. So for example, this is what I used to do when I first started budgeting. I got an account with Capital One 360, which allows you to have multiple savings accounts with no minimums and no fees, and they allow you to rename those accounts. So I went through and named them my goals. Things like a new car, car maintenance, home repairs, vacations, Christmas, etc. And every time that I got paid, I knew how much was going toward each specific category, so I just moved that money into those savings accounts and let them sit there. Another option that's very similar to this is I know that Ally Bank offers one savings account, and then they have these things called buckets, which are, again, just the little parts where you can split your savings account into a bunch of different goals that you can name and dedicate a certain amount of money toward these specific goals. This is a really good way to keep your money organized. However, I actually don't use either of those methods now. Now I keep the majority of my money inside one high yield savings account, and the way that I keep track of how much of that money goes towards each individual sinking fund is inside of my budget. So I budget with YNAB. If you have been here, you've seen any of my videos, you've probably heard me talk about it. But what I do is I allocate a certain amount of money every single month to a certain category, and that builds up inside of my budget over time. It doesn't matter if that money is in my savings account or my checking account. All that matters is that it is allocated for, and YNAB does all the work for me. This way, I'm not constantly having to move money around to different savings accounts or different buckets inside of savings accounts. It all just stays in my one big savings, and I can move things around in my budget as I need to. This is my preferred way of doing things, but of course, do whatever works best for you. I know that YNAB definitely has a strong learning curve, so if you want to see more about my personal budget and how I set it up, I will link that up here for you guys, because I have a video dedicated to my 2021 budget and how we go through and decide on those goals. But no matter which of these options you choose, the most important thing is I think that it's really important to keep this money in a high yield savings account. So a high yield savings account is different from your standard savings account because, well, it's high yield. It gives you more money back on your money every single year. So for example, a standard savings account that you would get at Bank of America or somewhere else like that they have a brick and mortar bank, is probably going to give you around 0.05% interest. Whereas with a high yield savings account that is done through an online bank, you can get up to 0.5 or 1% interest back on your money. Generally, there are no fees and no minimums. The reason that these banks are able to do that is because they are all online banks. So what they save by not having brick and mortar locations, they are able to give back to you to incentivize you to keep your money with them. I don't recommend putting your sinking funds inside of an investment account because the whole point of sinking funds is that you want to be able to easily access that money whenever you need it. And sometimes if you wrap your money up and inside an investment account, one, you could lose money if you plan on taking it out here shortly, and it can also be really hard to access that money and make it liquid or turn it into cash whenever you need it. It can take weeks, if not months, to do that. And we want to make sure that you have that money whenever you need it. So again, like I said before, sinking funds are not a wealth building tool. They are there to help you get out and stay out of debt and cover future you and your expenses. So how did sinking funds help me pay off credit card debt? When I started establishing sinking funds, I stopped having to use my credit card for emergencies. Now, like we talked about, most of these things that I was classifying emergencies weren't actually emergencies, but to me they were because I hadn't planned for them. And this just kept me in a constant cycle of paying off a little bit of my debt and then just going right back into it. Inevitably, it felt like every single time I got paid, there was some expense that came out of my credit card that I had not planned for. Now that I know what my annual fees and subscriptions are and I have planned for my sinking funds, I am in a much better spot, and most of the time, I know that I have that money there. And if it's something that I couldn't expect, that is what my emergency fund is for. I also really liked sinking funds because it gave my savings a purpose. To be perfectly honest with you, before when I had a savings account, it was really easy for me to justify taking out a little bit here and there for the things that I wanted because my savings didn't really have a true purpose. I didn't know why I was saving. I just knew that I should be saving. Whereas when I started breaking up my savings into my sinking funds, it gave all of that money a purpose. So now that $50 wasn't just taking $50 out of an account because I was supposed to have that money in there, that $50 would be a new car or car repairs or a vacation one day. And suddenly it became a lot harder for me to justify taking that money out of my savings because it had a purpose, it had a why for me. This also really helped me in paying off my debt because I became more confident with my money and I knew that I had my bases covered, so I could put the extra money that I had after funding all of my fixed expenses, my variable expenses, and my sinking funds toward my debt and not have to worry that I was just putting it toward my debt to end up having to go back into more debt because I didn't have the cash to cover an expense. For me, this was really empowering. It gave me a sense of control over my finances that I really needed, and it gave me a sense of confidence with my finances. I honestly wish I would have known about sinking funds way before I did. So everyone, that is it for our video on sinking funds. Don't forget, if you like this video, to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm, helps boost this video to the top. That way more people can find this content. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.